For 600 years, one rule decided who ran the world's oceans. Whoever built the biggest, most advanced ships won. Britain understood it. America perfected it. And for the last 80 years, nobody else came close. Then, in the second half of 2025, a ship slipped quietly out of a Chinese naval base and changed the math. It wasn't the biggest vessel ever built. It wasn't even the most expensive. But sitting on its deck was a piece of technology that only one other navy on Earth had ever managed to build properly. And that navy had spent 20 years and billions of dollars getting it right. China did it in a fraction of that time. This isn't really a story about a boat. It's a story about a shift in power, so quiet most people won't notice until it's already over. If videos like this are your thing, hit like right now and subscribe so you never miss one. Here's something most people never really sit down and think about. Land has borders. Air has borders, sort of. But the ocean has never really belonged to anyone. For as long as ships have existed, control of the sea has come down to one simple, brutal rule. Whoever can show up with the most force and stay there the longest gets to decide what happens next. Not on a treaty, not on a map, in practice, on the water itself. For centuries, that meant the Royal Navy. British warships didn't just win battles. They decided which countries could trade freely, which colonies could survive, and which ports stayed open to the rest of the world. An empire that never saw the sun set was, underneath all the politics, really just a very large fleet with very good logistics. When that empire finally faded, something had to fill the vacuum it left behind. That something was the United States Navy, and it filled the gap with one very specific piece of engineering: the aircraft carrier. Think about what a carrier actually is beyond just being a big gray ship. It is a mobile airport. It is a floating city that feeds, houses, and arms thousands of people at sea for months at a time. And it is a diplomatic threat that never needs to fire a shot to make its point. A submarine can hide in the dark and strike without warning. A destroyer can defend a coastline or escort a convoy. But only a carrier can project real, sustained power across an entire ocean and simply refuse to leave. After World War II, the United States built more of these than every other country on Earth combined, then mastered the hardest version of the technology, the catapult launch system. Older carriers use a ski jump ramp, which limits how heavy an aircraft can be at takeoff. A catapult solves that in one move, slinging a fully loaded jet off the deck at full flying speed. For 80 years, only the US truly mastered this at scale. France managed one. Everyone else, including China's first two carriers, made do with the ski jump. China didn't want a cheaper imitation. It wanted the real technology. On November 5, 2025, at Yulin Naval Base on Hainan Island in front of President Xi Jinping himself, China commissioned a warship called the Fujian into active service. Named after the coastal province that sits directly across the water from Taiwan, the ship carries hull number CV-18. At first glance, it doesn't look wildly different from any other large gray warship. 316 meters long, a beam stretching 76 meters across, a full load displacement estimated somewhere between 80 and 85,000 tons, and a crew of roughly 2,500 sailors and aviators living, working, and sleeping inside its hull for months at a stretch. But here's the one detail that made naval analysts across the world sit up straight. The Fujian is the first Chinese aircraft carrier ever built with an electromagnetic catapult launch system. Let that sit for a moment, because the gap this closes is enormous. China's first carrier, the Liaoning, was an unfinished Soviet-era hull rebuilt from the ground up. Its second, the Shandong, was a domestic copy of that same ski jump design. An important step, but still the older, simpler technology. The Fujian isn't playing catch-up anymore. It's the 13th aircraft carrier in the world to use catapult technology of any kind, and only the second nation after the United States to build a fully electromagnetic system instead of old-fashioned steam pistons. A steam catapult is essentially a carefully controlled explosion that shoves an aircraft into the sky. It works, but it's rough on the machinery. An electromagnetic catapult replaces that with a linear induction motor, a powerful magnetic rail built into the deck that accelerates the aircraft smoothly, with far more precision and less wear. The United States spent roughly 2 decades and well over $10 billion developing this exact technology for its Ford-class carriers, and even then ran into well-publicized reliability problems. China went from essentially a standing start to a working system on an operational warship in a fraction of that time and at a fraction of the cost. That single fact is what turned the Fujian from just another warship into a genuine geopolitical event the moment it was confirmed. What makes the Fujian story even more interesting is that almost none of it happened in secret. This wasn't some hidden project unveiled all at once. It was built, tested, and shown to the world in stages, out in the open for anyone paying attention. Construction began at Jiangnan Shipyard in Shanghai, one of the largest and busiest shipbuilding complexes on the planet, with the hull laid down sometime between 2015 and early 2016. The ship was formally launched into the water on June 17, 2022, a milestone that made international headlines the moment satellite images confirmed its catapult tracks were visible on the deck. From there, it entered an unusually long, unusually careful testing period, roughly 3 full years of sea trials before its eventual commissioning, a far more cautious runway than either of China's first 2 carriers required, and for good reason. Building a working ski jump carrier is one engineering challenge. Building a reliable, repeatable electromagnetic catapult system, one that has to launch heavy aircraft off a moving, rolling deck thousands of times without failure, is an entirely different level of difficulty. By September of 2025, the Fujian had completed at least 9 separate sea trials, each testing a different layer of the ship: propulsion, aviation operations, weapon systems, and full combat systems integration. During that 9th trial, the carrier sailed through the Taiwan Strait and into the South China Sea, and it was on that voyage that its crew carried out the first confirmed catapult launches and arrested landings of 3 different aircraft types in a single testing window. A detail that told analysts the ship's air wing wasn't just a future promise. It was already being actively rehearsed. It's easy to talk about magnets, catapults, and displacement tonnage and forget that every one of those numbers depends on thousands of ordinary people learning to do something almost nobody on their side of the world has ever done before. Deck crews have to move aircraft, fuel, and weapons at a much faster tempo. Pilots have to trust a machine, flinging them off the deck at speeds their own engines could never produce. The speed of these trials strongly suggests years of hidden groundwork, simulators, and land-based test facilities, long before the ship ever left the dock. So what does all of this technology actually buy China in practical real-world terms? A catapult system doesn't just launch planes faster than a ski jump ramp. It fundamentally changes what kinds of planes a carrier can operate in the first place. On a ski jump carrier, heavier aircraft simply cannot take off safely, carrying a full weapons load and a full fuel tank. That single limitation quietly shapes an entire Navy's strategy from the ground up. The Fujian breaks that ceiling completely. Its 3 electromagnetic catapults can launch aircraft at significantly higher weights than either of China's earlier carriers ever could. The headline aircraft here is the J-35, China's newest carrier-based stealth fighter, frequently compared by Western analysts to the American F-35C. Stealth fighters are extraordinarily expensive and complicated to build for one very specific reason. They're engineered to slip past enemy radar almost entirely, strike a target, and disappear again before anyone even registers they were ever there. Alongside the J-35, the Fujian has also launched the J-15T, an upgraded catapult-compatible fighter, and the J-15DT, a specialized electronic warfare variant purpose-built to jam enemy radar before a strike ever begins. And then there's the aircraft that quietly matters just as much as any fighter jet on that deck, the KJ-600. This is a fixed-wing early warning aircraft, broadly similar in role to the American E-2 Hawkeye. Until the Fujian, Chinese carriers relied entirely on helicopters for this job, and helicopters simply cannot fly as high, travel as far, or scan anywhere near as much ocean. Getting the KJ-600 airborne means Chinese carrier strike groups can now see much farther over the horizon, sometimes hundreds of kilometers out. Put all of those pieces together: stealth fighters, electronic warfare jets, and long-range radar planes, and you get a carrier air wing built along roughly the same architecture as the most advanced navies on the planet. One important caveat: the Fujian is not nuclear-powered. It runs on conventional steam turbine propulsion, making it by a wide margin the largest conventionally powered warship on Earth right now, a genuine limitation compared to America's nuclear carriers. After commissioning, the Fujian sailed back toward Shanghai for further preparation, working toward what Chinese state media has described as full combat capability sometime during 2026. A ship this significant doesn't exist in a vacuum. Every time the carrier has moved through the Taiwan Strait, the transit has been tracked, photographed, and publicly reported by regional navies and independent observers alike. Japan's Ministry of Defense routinely publishes details of Chinese naval movements near its waters. The Philippines, locked in its own disputes with China over reefs and shoals in the South China Sea, watches with obvious unease. Taiwan treats every Fujian transit as a moment worth public comment. Washington has responded through steady, ongoing assessment rather than public alarm. The Pentagon's annual report to Congress on Chinese military developments has tracked the Fujian's progress closely, and American naval officials have been notably candid about just how quickly China closed a gap many assumed would take considerably longer. That candor matters. Militaries don't usually admit a rival caught up faster than expected, unless the evidence has become impossible to spin any other way. Look at the map of the region the Fujian actually operates in. The Taiwan Strait sits directly to its west. The South China Sea lies just beyond that, and further out sit what military planners call the first and second island chains, a string of islands stretching from Japan down through the Philippines that has for decades effectively boxed in Chinese naval power. The Fujian is a direct answer to that old limitation. And it isn't happening in isolation. According to the U.S. Department of Defense's own assessment, the People's Liberation Army Navy intends to add roughly 6 more aircraft carriers over the coming decade, working toward a total fleet of 9 by 2035. A 4th carrier, the Type 004, is already reportedly under construction, expected to be nuclear-powered and potentially larger than America's newest Ford-class carriers. There's a hard economic logic underneath all of this, too. China currently holds the largest shipbuilding capacity on Earth, civilian and military combined, by a wide margin over every other nation. The United States, by contrast, has publicly struggled with shrinking shipyard capacity and repeated construction delays, problems senior officials have acknowledged in congressional testimony. None of this means the balance of power flips overnight. The U.S. Navy still operates 11 nuclear-powered carriers, backed by global bases and decades of alliances. But the gap that used to look nearly impossible to close within a generation just did. The ocean has never truly belonged to anyone. It can't be fenced off, paved over, or permanently occupied. For nearly a century, the answer to who controls it was almost never in serious doubt. Now, for the first time in a long while, it genuinely is. Almost everything sitting in your home right now crossed the exact kind of contested water this story is about. That's really what a ship like the Fujian is arguing, quietly, one sea trial at a time. If this kept you watching, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.